The folder on the kitchen table had 3 names on it, and not one of them was Shelby's. She'd driven 4 hours from Hamilton to be here, left her kids with Mark's sister, taken Friday off from the renovation company. She'd spent 8 years building out of a borrowed van and a secondhand skill saw. Her mother, Irene, was at the counter, rearranging dish towels she had rearranged an hour earlier. Her father, Murray, sat at the head of the table, with his hands flat on the wood, and his expression already settled into something that told Shelby the conversation had already happened without her. "Your brothers are in the front room," he said. "Sit down." Troy had driven 40 minutes from his place outside Wingham. Wade still lived in the township, 2 streets from the farmhouse, had been over for dinner twice a week, for as long as Shelby could remember. Neither of them looked at her directly when she came through the doorway. Murray carried the folder in himself and laid 3 sheets on the coffee table in a row. The first sheet had Troy's name at the top. Murray told him that as the oldest, he would take the sugar bush. 40 acres of maple woodlot their grandfather had tapped every March for 3 generations, along with the farmhouse and the equipment shed. The operation wasn't large, but the syrup it produced moved well at local shops and a couple of farm markets in the county. Troy picked up the page and studied the property description. The second sheet was Wade's. He would take the general store at the edge of town, a building their family had operated since before Shelby was born, plus the half-acre of land behind it where Murray had always talked about building a proper workshop. Wade folded his page in half without reading it. The third sheet stayed face down. "What's the third one?" Shelby asked. "That one's for signing," Murray said, "to confirm you were informed." "Informed of what, exactly?" "That your father and I made our wishes clear while we were still capable of it." He pushed the sheet toward her. "You have a house in Hamilton. You have the company. Mark has steady work. You're settled. The property should stay with the boys. They're the ones who are still here, keeping everything running." Irene said something about tea and disappeared into the kitchen. Shelby looked at the form. 1 paragraph, 2 signature lines, a date. It confirmed that she understood her parents were voluntarily transferring their property to their sons, and that she would not dispute it. "When did you decide this?" she asked. "We've been thinking it over for some time," Murray said. "You didn't mention you were thinking it over. We didn't want to cause trouble before it was necessary." Irene had come back to the doorway, holding a dish towel. "You're doing well, Shelby. We didn't want you worrying over property your brothers depend on." Shelby looked at Troy, then at Wade. Neither of them offered anything. She picked up the pen and signed her name at the bottom, the same clean signature she used on client contracts. She set the pen down. Murray pulled the sheet back before the ink was dry. "Good," he said. "Now about the other matter." She assumed he meant the title transfers. She was wrong. "We've been talking," Murray said, "about moving to Hamilton. Being closer to the hospital. The drive to Goderich for appointments is getting hard on your mother." Shelby sat very still. "You want to move to Hamilton?" "To your place," Irene said from the doorway. "It's just you and Mark and the children. You have the room." "Troy just received the farmhouse," Shelby said. Troy cleared his throat. "Running the sugar bush in the spring means the hired crew is in and out all day. Cookers going at all hours. It's not the right environment for 2 older people trying to rest." "My apartment's above the store," Wade said quickly. "You know what the highway sounds like up there. It wouldn't work for them long term." "You live 10 minutes from here," Shelby said. "It's small," Wade said. It wouldn't work." Irene moved into the room and sat in the armchair near the window. "A mother is more comfortable with her daughter. You know that. Your place is close to the hospital, close to everything. It makes sense." Shelby looked at the 3 sheets on the coffee table. The property had been distributed among the people who were staying. The responsibility for Murray and Irene was intended for the one who had left, because she had built something elsewhere and could presumably absorb it without anyone calling it what it was. "If they move in with me," she said carefully, "what does that look like? Who pays for groceries, medication, the things that come up? When Dad needs help at night, who gets up?" Troy pressed his thumb along the edge of his property sheet. Wade studied the ceiling. "We'd help," Troy said. "How? What does that mean in practice?" Neither of them answered. "I'll think about it," Shelby said, which was the only thing that sat between her and the door. She drove back to Hamilton the next morning. The kids were already awake when she got home. Mark had coffee ready, and he listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of the reasons she'd married him. When she finished, he asked what she was going to do. Make a plan, she said. That's different from saying yes. Shelby had started the renovation company 7 years ago with a contractor's license, a table saw she'd found on Kijiji, and the understanding that she was good at the work, even though no one had ever encouraged her toward it. She'd done the pre-apprenticeship program at Mohawk College the winter, after she and Mark got married, evenings and Saturday mornings paying for it herself, because the only formal training she'd had was what she'd picked up from YouTube videos and 2 summers doing demo work for a general contractor in Guelph. When she was 18, she'd applied to a 2-year building construction program in Hamilton. The acceptance came in April. She'd saved enough from 2 summers at the co-op to cover the registration fee and buy tools. Then, the week before she was supposed to enroll, Murray needed to replace a vacuum pump on the sap processing line. The maple operation was short. The equipment couldn't wait. Her deposit and her tools, gone. Murray told her she could reapply next year. She never did, because by then it was clear that something in the family would always need her money more than she did. What she had now, she'd made without any of it. She didn't say so, but she thought about it the whole drive back from Goderich. 6 weeks passed. Shelby heard from Barbara, an old family friend who still lived near the township, that Murray and Irene were uncomfortable at the farmhouse. Troy had brought a sugaring crew in earlier than expected. The kitchen was doubling as equipment storage. Irene had been cooking meals on a hot plate set up in the back bedroom. Shelby called Irene, who said everything was fine. 2 weeks after that, Barbara called again. Murray and Irene had moved to Wade's apartment above the store. They were sharing a pull-out sofa. Wade's girlfriend had moved back in. There was no second bedroom. Shelby drove up on a Saturday with groceries and a refill of Irene's blood pressure prescription. The apartment smelled like takeout containers. Irene was sitting in the corner with her coat still on because there was no hooks for it. Murray was on the pull-out with the expression of a man who had not expected to end up here. She didn't say anything about it. She put the medication on the kitchen counter and asked when they'd last eaten a proper meal. On the highway back to Hamilton, she called Mark. They're at Wade's, she said. It's not sustainable. Are you going to bring them home? I'm going to build a structure, she said. That's different. She spent the next 2 evenings at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator. Fixed costs, somewhere safe to live, a part-time support worker, prescriptions, follow-up appointments for Irene's blood pressure and Murray's knee. She divided the total into 4 columns. Her name was in one of them. She found a rental unit in a seniors-friendly low-rise 40 minutes from Hamilton, a 10-minute drive from a community health center. 1 bedroom, no step at the entrance, wide bathroom doorway. The landlord agreed to install grab bars and a non-slip mat in the tub. The rent was manageable, split 4 ways. She contacted a woman named Donna, a retired PSW Barbara knew who took private hourly work. Donna asked the right questions without being asked to. Could Irene manage the bathroom alone? Did Murray know the emergency protocols if Irene's blood pressure spiked? Were there dietary restrictions she needed to plan around? Shelby appreciated a professional who didn't wait to be briefed. She transferred her quarter of the deposit to the landlord's account and asked that the remaining balance be listed as 3 separate line items, each assigned to a name. Then she called a meeting. She drove up on a Thursday. Troy and Wade arrived separately, which she noted. Murray sat at the kitchen table in the apartment with his hands folded. Irene sat beside him. Nobody spoke until Shelby set a folder on the table. I've found a place, she said. Ground floor, close to the health center, room for a wheelchair later if it comes to that. I've arranged for a support worker to come in weekday mornings. She's worked with stroke patients before, and she knows what she's doing. The cost is divided 4 ways. I've already paid my share of the deposit. Troy picked up the expense sheet. He looked at the numbers without speaking for a moment. That's a significant amount, he said. It's less than a long-term care facility. It's less than what this family would spend in emergency costs if something happens and nobody is organized. You could just bring them to your place, Wade said. You've got the extra room. I have a room, Shelby said. I also have 2 children, a business, and a husband who is not a full-time caregiver. Mom and Dad need a place that belongs to them, where they wake up in the morning and nobody's schedule is disrupted by the fact that they exist. I'm not bringing them into my home, so Mark and I carry everything while the 2 of you stop by when it's convenient. Murray looked at the table. Irene was quiet. I want each of us to commit to 2 days a week, Shelby continued. Those are your days to visit, handle appointments, or stay if something comes up. I take 2 days. Donna covers the weekday mornings. If you can't make your day, you arrange a replacement. You don't call me. The change gets posted in the family group. Everyone can see who shows up and who doesn't. It sounds like a work rota, Troy said. When you took the sugar bush, you wanted the property boundary written into the deed. You wanted the access easement documented. You wanted the equipment inventory attached to the transfer. All of it was recorded. That's property, Troy said. It's different. This is your parents' care. Why is it less important? Troy didn't have an answer for that. If we're not going to do this properly, Shelby said, then I need both of you to go into that room right now and tell Mom and Dad that you received their property, but you're not prepared to take a share of looking after them. Because that's what not signing this means. The room was quiet. Wade reached across the table and picked up the pen. He signed without another word. Troy watched his younger brother for a moment, then pulled the sheet toward himself and added his name. Shelby photographed both pages on her phone and sent them to the family group before anyone left the table. Underneath, she typed one line, "Schedule changes go here. No private arrangements. Everyone sees." The first 2 months were uneven. Troy showed up when the sugar bush wasn't demanding his time, which in the autumn was often enough. But in the late winter, he disappeared into the operation, and the gaps in his schedule became a pattern Shelby documented without commentary in the group chat. He always transferred his share of the costs on time. He just wasn't there. Wade was more reliable than she'd expected. He started stopping by on Sunday mornings with Tim's and groceries, even on weeks that weren't his. He called Irene on evenings when Donna wasn't scheduled. When Murray's knee locked up overnight and needed a walk-in visit, Wade drove them himself and texted Shelby a photo of the discharge paperwork before she'd even woken up. Donna kept a small handwritten log on the kitchen counter, nothing formal, just a line or two each morning. Irene's arm exercises completed. Murray took both medications with breakfast, blood pressure slightly elevated, noted. Shelby read it every second night on her phone the way she read site inspection notes. 8 months in, Irene fell. She slipped in the bathroom on a morning when Donna hadn't arrived yet. Murray called Wade. Wade called Shelby. The fracture was minor. Her wrist, not her hip, but she stayed in the hospital for 3 days and came home with a compression wrap and a referral to occupational therapy. When Shelby arrived at the hospital the evening Irene was admitted, Troy was already in the hallway. He'd driven down without being asked. He was sitting in a plastic chair with a Tim Hortons cup and his coat still on, and when Shelby came through the sliding doors, he handed her one of the coffees without saying anything. They sat together for a while without talking. She told me the bath mat was sliding, Troy said eventually. I said I'd look at it. That was 3 weeks ago. Shelby didn't answer. I keep treating it like the farm, he said. Like if I'm sending money and showing up most of the time, that's the job done. He turned the cup in his hands. It's not the same thing. No, Shelby said. It isn't. That wasn't an apology. She'd stopped waiting for those. What she needed from Troy was the follow-through, and in the months after Irene's discharge, his name appeared on the schedule the way it was supposed to. On an afternoon in late October, Shelby stopped by to drop off a prescription refill, and Irene called her into the bedroom. Murray was out walking with Wade. Irene was sitting on the edge of the bed with a small cardboard box on her lap. Lid dented at one corner, the kind of box that holds a ream of paper. I've been meaning to give you this for a long time, Irene said. I kept putting it off. Shelby sat on the corner of the bed. Irene lifted the lid. Inside, a letter on Mohawk College letterhead, Shelby's full name across the top. We are pleased to confirm your acceptance into the building construction, renovation and conservation technician program, dated 11 years ago. Underneath the letter, a photograph. Shelby standing outside a house in Hamilton's East End, the first full renovation she'd managed on her own. Porch rebuilt from the subfloor up, original brick repointed, new windows trimmed in white. Someone had taken the photo from across the street and she'd never seen this copy. Beneath that, a clipping from a local neighborhood newsletter. Hamilton renovation firm wins Community Build Award. A photo of Shelby in a hard hat, handing keys to a homeowner outside a house on Cannon Street. Irene had cut it neatly along the column margin. There were 5 or 6 more like it. A listing from a real estate site that mentioned the renovations Shelby's company had done. A small feature in a regional trades magazine. The Mohawk College letter tucked back beneath everything, refolded into its original creases. Where did you get these? Shelby asked. Barbara would send me things she came across. Sometimes I found them myself. That newsletter one I got at the library when we were in Hamilton for your father's knee appointment. Irene looked at the box. I've had that letter since the college sent it. Your father never knew I kept it. Shelby held the acceptance letter. The paper had softened at the fold lines from being opened and closed so many times. You knew I'd applied, Shelby said. I knew, Irene said. I knew when Murray took that money. I told myself you were young, that there would be other chances. I told myself a lot of things that were easier to believe than what was actually true. She was quiet for a moment. I was proud of you. I have been for a long time. I didn't know how to say it at a point when it would have mattered. The sound of someone mowing the lawn outside came through the window. I know you were afraid of him, Shelby said. I was, Irene said simply. But I was the one who paid for that. Irene's hands tightened on the edge of the box. She didn't argue. She nodded slowly, and her eyes went red at the corners. And she didn't try to say anything to balance out what Shelby had just said, which was the kindest thing she could have done. Shelby sat with her until the quiet felt like something shared rather than something difficult. Before she left, she took the photograph from the box. I'm going to frame this, she said. I'll bring you a copy. Irene looked up at her. Don't put it somewhere it won't be seen. Murray came to Hamilton in January for a follow-up at the knee specialist. Mark picked him up from the appointment while Shelby finished a site walkthrough in Ancaster. When she got home, Murray was standing in the front hallway, looking at the wall beside her office. She'd had the photograph framed the month before and hung it at eye level at the entrance to her workspace. The one from outside the East End house, the porch job, the morning light catching the brick. Beside it, she'd hung her daughter Maisie's project from the school engineering fair, a hand-drawn cross-section of a residential renovation, pencil on graph paper, measurements in Maisie's precise 12-year-old handwriting. She'd placed second in the regional division. Murray was looking at both of them when Shelby came in. That the Barton Street house? He asked. No, East End, early work. She dropped her bag on the bench. Mark's sister took the photo. He studied it. Then he studied Maisie's drawing. Then he looked at Shelby in a way he didn't usually look at her, like he was taking stock of something he'd miscalculated. I should not have taken your tools, he said. He said it the way he said most things. Low, no ceremony around it. It was the first time in 11 years he'd said anything like it, and Shelby understood that it had cost him something to get there. The farm needed it, she said. I understood that even then. Doesn't make it right. No, she said, it doesn't. He put his coat on to leave. At the door, he turned back to look at the wall. Keep that where people can see it, he said. Don't let it sit in a box. Troy called her in March. The sugar bush had a bad season, equipment failure during peak processing, a loss that put him behind on a lease payment for the cooker. He didn't ask Shelby for money outright. He mentioned it in a way that assumed she'd offer. She didn't. What are you doing about it? She asked. Trying to work out a payment plan with the equipment company, he said. That sounds like the right approach, she said, and waited. There was a pause. I thought maybe, he started. The farm is yours, Troy, she said. The decisions you make with it are yours. I'm not in a position to take on someone else's business risk. She said it without hardness, just as a fact. I hope the payment plan works out. He didn't say much after that. She didn't feel satisfied about it. She felt tired in the way she always felt tired after these conversations, the kind of tiredness that comes from having to repeat, again, that a boundary she'd drawn was still there. Wade came around without her having to ask. He drove down to Hamilton twice that spring, just to bring Irene's favorite lemon tea from the shop in the township, the loose-leaf kind she'd been buying for 30 years. He stayed for an hour each time, helped Murray figure out the new pharmacy FAPs on his phone, and didn't make a production of any of it. Shelby started looking forward to his visits in a way she hadn't expected. Maisie's school year ended in June with an awards assembly. Shelby sat through in a gymnasium that smelled of floor wax and fruit punch. Maisie won recognition for the engineering fair project, the renovation cross-section. The certificate had her full name printed on it and the school crest embossed in the corner. On the drive home, Maisie held it on her lap and said she was going to put it in her desk drawer. Why? Shelby asked. It's just a school thing, Maisie said. It's not that important. It's something you did well, Shelby said. Why would you put it somewhere it can't be seen? Maisie shrugged in the way she shrugged when she was thinking. I don't know. It would feel like showing off. Shelby drove for a moment without answering. There's a difference, she said, between showing off and acknowledging something you worked for. One of those things is honest. The next afternoon, she had the certificate framed. She chose a maple frame, a trim offcut from an Ancaster job, cleaned up and finished by one of her crew. She rehung Maisie's engineering drawing in the maple frame beside the East End photograph, and she added the Mohawk acceptance letter underneath both of them, small and easy to miss unless you were looking. That evening, Maisie walked past on her way to the kitchen and stopped. Did you add something? She asked. Yeah. Maisie leaned in to read the letter. Then she looked at the photograph, then back at the letter. Is that your acceptance? She asked. It is. You got into a college program and you never told me. I didn't go, Shelby said. Things came up with the family. The timing wasn't right. Maisie was quiet for a moment, looking at the wall. At the photograph of her mother standing outside a renovated porch at 26, sunburned and tired and satisfied. At the engineering cross-section in the maple frame. At the letter that had been folded in a cardboard box for 11 years. But you got there anyway, Maisie said. A different way, Shelby said. Maisie nodded slowly, filing it. Okay, she said, and went to get her cereal. Shelby stood in the hallway a moment longer. Outside, a late June evening was doing what Ontario evenings do. The kind of warm that settles after the sun drops, the neighbors' gardens going amber. The light came through the window and caught the glass in Maisie's frame, and the maple trim glowed the way that wood does when it's been properly finished. The work you love is worth protecting, Shelby thought. Your name belongs on the things you build. You don't wait for someone else's permission to put them where they can be seen. She went to start the dishes. The wall held what it held.